Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Governance and Audit Committee today, Thursday, the 2nd of February, here at Elizabeth House in Breckland. If everybody's ready, I think we'll crack on as it's now 10 o'clock. So if we could start with the first item, which is minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of September, 2022. So that pages 4 to 13 on your agenda packs. Does anybody have any comment for accuracy only on the minutes of the previous meeting? No? Are you happy then, members of the committee, that I sign that they're a true and accurate record? Thank you very much. Which takes us to actions arising from the minutes. Are there any actions arising that are not already covered in the agenda today that anybody wants to address? Councillor Morton.
Thank you, Chairman. I may have missed it, but on page 7 of the minutes, there was reference to a request for detailed information about the costs of temporary accommodation. Large costs they were referred to. I don't know if that's available.
What paragraph are you on page 7? Okay. Just trying to find that on page 7. Oh, here we go. It was agreed that figures in terms of spend be brought back to the committee in February. Yes, please.
After Alex, she's got that.
Fine, so we'll pick that up on the agenda. Okay, any other comments? No? Lovely. Okay, so we move on to apologies. Julie, over to you. Apologies and any other announcements?
Chairman, there are no apologies.
Lovely. And you had one announcement?
Yes, I did. I must apologise to Mr. Fowler for not adding his name to the front of the agenda again. Thank you. I will remember next time.
Well, you're very welcome, David. It's nice to see you here. Right, so we move on to item 4, urgent business. I am not aware of any, which takes us on to item 5, which is declarations of interests. Members, do you have anything to declare that you haven't already declared? None? Lovely, thank you very much. So item 6, non-members wishing to address the meeting. So we have Councillors Morton and Burt, and we have two cabinet members as well. You're both very welcome, presenting their items. So that takes us on to item 7, training, which is a standing item. Any item, anybody or requests from members of the committee? No, which takes us on to item 8. The Q3, Q4 risk report on page 14 to 35 of our agendas. And we've got Cabinet Member Jane James here to present the report. Jane, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm delighted to bring the Q3/4 risk report to the committee today. Currently, the number of strategic risks identified by the council is 11. That's a decrease of 1 compared to last quarter, as you'll recall. This risk relates to leisure reopening and was discussed the last time this report was seen by this committee. One area that I would like to draw your attention to relates to the waste consultation and nutrient neutrality risks. As members will note from the report, there has been movement with regard to this risk in relation to announcements and proposed ways forward. And whilst these are steps in the right direction, the council has taken the decision not to change the current risk ratings. The reason for this is that currently these announcements have yet to translate into tangible mitigations, which could lower the risk. Whilst I have no doubts that these announcements are positive steps forward, we will need to allow time for them to become fully realised and implemented. I'll now pass on to Ryan, who'll just pick up on a couple of additional points. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. There's just a couple bits which I'll just go over. So again, on that leisure risk, we spoke about that. Last time we came here, that's based on the fact we now think that the levels of participation at leisure are now recovered sort of pre-COVID levels. So we're happy that's no longer a strategic risk to the organisation. Those numbers are included in the performance report. And the only other one which is in the text of the specific risks relates to cyber and GDPR and the rescoring of those. That cyber risk was rescored at the request of this committee, and the GDPR risk was rescored at the request of Audit, who believed that it was too high. So that's why we've rescored those. I'm obviously happy to take any questions on the report that anyone's got.
Thank you. Well, members, over to you. Any comments or questions? So, Councillor Clark, and then we'll take David.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Jane and Ryan. Just looking at the those high risks, they've obviously gone down in terms of the highest ones of the 5x5. And obviously that's a judgment call on those. I think we'll come on to nutrient neutrality later on, because that's also listed in the audit report in terms of the top 5. I agree with the ones that we've got in there, particularly around housing, services, temporary accommodation, and that's maybe a sort of fairly fluid. In terms of those which aren't in the 5x5 category, they might reach, say, 5x4, so they may be like they're not quite in the red zone, you know, of the heat map. Do you anticipate any of those moving into the highest category at the moment? Obviously, that's horizon scanning, and some things are outside our control. I think everything's covered, but it'd be good to hear your views on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There's nothing in terms of what we're scoring an amber on that RAG rating, which I'm seeing as rising at the moment. There's obviously always potential for that with stuff like the emerging policy risk, which was high and has come down. But in terms of the other areas, there's nothing specific that I'm aware of which is going to put us at those higher risks. I guess, as we sort of said in the introduction, the good position we're in at the moment on nutrient neutrality and the waste consultation is now that there's announcements we can move forward. There's obviously a way out of that red area for us, but I just want us to sort of be a little bit further down that path before we do it, because I don't want us to decrease that risk, get to the mitigations, look at them and realise that perhaps it's either not as much as we needed from a burdens funding perspective, or it, you know, in terms of nutrient neutrality, one of the third parties comes back and says that there's something not quite right. So in terms of amber, there's nothing I'm seeing rising. In terms of those red ones, I'm seeing a way forwards, but I just need to get it a little bit further down the line before I push it down into that amber.
Thank you. Mr. Fowler.
Thank you. Just a few points of clarification. Page 19, Councillor Morton mentioned it earlier. We've got there in potential consequences, large cost to the council. I did ask at the last meeting whether that could be quantified. What does large mean? Have you got any comment on that? Should we go to all? Yeah, sure. The next one on that same risk, there's national awareness been raised around the risk of poor housing conditions, public sector owned housing, mould, condensation, etc. Just wonder whether the council was taking that into consideration as a risk, whether there's any mitigation factors been put in place. Page 23. In the action plan there, it says National Planning Policy Framework 2024 review. Well, it's actually taking place at the moment. The consultation is live at the moment. As I understand it, the expectation is that change in policy will be put in place this year. So just a date check really on that.
Just on that subject, there is a cabinet paper on Monday looking at the initial response to that framework consultation.
Right. Then on page, the last one, page 31. In the section there that says latest note, third line down, there's a typo, I think it should be R, but as the contracts are all long-term contracts, just wondered, I know the planning and building control contract is due to end in 2024, I think, is it? And I don't know the waste management. It's whether, obviously with procurement processes and SHUPE issues and so forth, isn't that an issue that should be sort of under consideration now or very soon? Just about timescales, really, to ensure continuation of service. Thank you.
So I'll deal with those one by one. So in terms of cost of the council, it should be included in the report. I was hoping to bring the latest figure to you guys today, but the person who was getting that figure for me has gone off ill. I will email it out because I do appreciate that moving forward, we do need to use that cost of temporary accommodation to sort of underline where we are from a risk perspective on there. In terms of housing conditions, in the performance report, we do talk about category 1 hazards, and we do record those in terms of the number of notices served. There's nothing specific which I'm aware of around housing standards is impacting that at the moment, but I will obviously double check that. That's linked to the fact that obviously we don't own stock, so there's some slight nuances there. In terms of that planning framework, when I will check that time scale, because I do agree if that's underway, then that needs to be revised. And the contracts one, I'm happy in the next risk report that I can bring something around what's going on with those specific strategic contracts. Overall, the contracts are just continuing to be monitored, but if it's something the committee feels they would like around contract renewal and including end dates and stuff in those contracts in the report, I'm more than happy to go away and discuss that and hopefully include that moving forwards.
Alison.
Thank you. I was just going to add to Ryan's response there on the numbers for the housing. So we report these in the quarterly finance report to Cabinet. So apologies, it doesn't come to this meeting, but at the Q3 report, which is due to Cabinet next week, the additional cost to housing is just over 300,000. And the additional cost to housing benefit is just over 800,000. So they are significant costs. We're mitigating those through purchasing our own houses. There was a council report back in October, and we've purchased 7 houses so far of our own to bring that down in future years. So we have a plan, but those are the quantum of the costs. And just to add on the contracts, you're absolutely right. We do need to look at those contracts before they come up for renewal, and you will very shortly see through the committee process something on the planning and building control, because you're quite correct, that ends in June 2024.
Want to come back?
Yeah, you just confirmed that the council's purchasing some housing stock. So, Brian, you said in terms of housing conditions, there is some accommodation in the ownership of the council in terms of conditions and assessment of that. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that's my confusion there. It's temporary accommodation stock. In my head, I was thinking of sort of council housing stock. But you are correct, we do obviously own stock, so I will look into that, yeah.
Faye Hayward.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that in terms of housing standards, we're currently undertaking internal audit work on this, and we will be looking at the situation around mould and damp. So you will receive some assurance at the next meeting for the controls on that.
Lovely, thank you. So who did I have next? I had Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 questions. Do you want to do them all, or do you want to break
Are
it
they
up?
all to the same person?
Well, it's general comments, and it's
Well, let's see how we go then.
okay. So page 15, 1.9, you've already mentioned that the leisure reopening risk has been removed, and fair enough, because the exact risk that's been specified has been eliminated. However, there are still significant risks associated with our leisure facilities. There's 2 which I can think of, which I think are very relevant now. There've been multiple reports across the country concerned with swimming pools having to close due to the exceptionally high energy costs associated with them. Now, if I've got this right, we're not in a position to close it because of our PFI contracts, and that protects the profits of the providers, so that carries on. But does that not mean that we are at risk of very high energy cost bills there that we will have to pay? And the other side to the leisure facilities is that they are one of our highest carbon emitters, and we don't appear to have a plan to address this, and that is likely to have to cost money going forward. That's the first question. Do you want to carry on?
Do you want to take that, Faye?
I just wanted to provide some assurance that those particular points were absolutely central to our conversations about next year's programme. And we've got the next agenda item, which is the plan for the year ahead, but you will see an audit on leisure in there covering those points. So some of your questions will hopefully be answered by that piece of work as it's scheduled for next year.
Okay, could we perhaps go on to page 22, the sustainability strategy? So I think it says in the minutes, I've mentioned before, my concern that as time goes on, this risk will become elevated. Now, we've already had the organisational carbon footprint 2020-21 and 21-22 presented to Cabinet. I think that was 21st of November last year. And that showed, despite some very speculative ideas, including hydrogenated vegetable oil as road fuel, that despite all of the efforts that we put in, we are only able to reach half of our target by 2035. So on the basis that we don't actually have a plan, let alone an implementation of that plan, why is this risk still staying exactly where it is? It's been static since we started it.
It's a fair point, Kaz. It is ultimately a long-term risk to the council in that it could have a 2035 target date on it. I do appreciate that the report did say that, but from memory, the then portfolio holder basically spoke about the technology and availability and stuff like that. I'm happy to go away and look at it again, but ultimately the reason it doesn't move is because we do have a significant period of time. Admittedly, that is getting shorter, is what I know you'll say, but that's why that risk isn't moving at the moment. Because ultimately, if we put it up to a 5x5, for example, we've ultimately, under our risk appetite, got to get that down quite quickly. So that's why the risk is there at the moment, because ultimately of the time periods we're talking about.
Okay, I think that really does need to looking at in light of that. You said, that we had these.
I tell you what, we've had the response. We've got another question.
I have. Okay. Move on to page 24 then, the critical risk of breach from the IT, and page 29, the GDPR. These are both related. In both cases, the likelihood of those events has been reduced. However, again, in both cases, the risk, the impact has risen. It's gone from a 4.3 rating to a 3.4 rating. Now, impact seems to be fairly intrinsic to the risk, to my way of looking at it. So this type of movement does look a little bit suspicious in that it's almost as if one goes down, it allows the other one to go up, which is not the way in which I would have thought the RAG ratings should work. There's nothing in the text as to why the impact rating is now higher. So could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, of course. The reason we've done that is around the rescoring, because I think we've lowered the impact before, and the comments we've had back from the committee are ultimately, well, how do you lower the impact of the risk? Because the impact is the impact of it. We can't do anything about that if someone gets into the system. The way we've done that, I think the way the committee's always looked at that risk when we've discussed it, is we can lower the likelihood, but there's limited amounts we can lower the impact on. So that's why it's been scored that way, in that we think we can lower the likelihood, but when we've discussed before, we've been told that we've lowered the impact too much. So that's why it's that balance. Ultimately, I agree with that point. The stuff we can do around impact is, you can shut down your systems quicker if someone gets in, things like that. But your impact is always going to be very high. And especially on these risks, I know we've spoken before on that criteria of it. If someone gets in the system, they could do lots of damage, they could do no damage. So it is around, we ultimately have to err on the safe side and put a higher impact on it and lower the likelihood as a mitigation strategy.
Well, there you are, ladies and gentlemen. It just shows that they do listen to the opinions of this committee. So thank you for that. I've got Councillor Kybert next.
Thank you, Chairman. On that, the second of those items just discussed, the GDPR risk. Has there been any improvement in the number of members completing training, and will there be a programme for new members immediately following the election? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kyburd. So you may be aware that coming to general purposes shortly is an outline of the member training plan, and that is an intrinsic part of our new member support. And actually, we're coming to the point within the HUT 6 training side of things that we're all due for refreshers. It's one of those things, much like safeguarding. The world evolves, new threats become apparent, and we need to be, I suppose the best word is agile and aware enough to respond to those. The member current training is an improving picture, but I would encourage all members to review their training needs and perhaps engage or complete if they haven't done so already. Thank you.
Members, any further questions? The recommendation is on page 14 of your agendas, and that's to note the report. Do I have any further queries or comments before we do that? All happy to note the report? Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, and thank you to the officers for presenting. So we move on to item 9, the strategic and annual internal audit plans on page 36 to 62 of your agendas. Faye Hayward, Faye, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious that this particular report is very lengthy. Now, some of the elements of this report are formalities, so I would just guide you through the high-level points, I think, and direct you to the areas where we could really use your input and your feedback. So the first, the introduction just outlines why we produced the paper. The internal audit strategy and charter are formal documents that we are required to provide to you for approval as part of the public sector internal audit standards. They are, as I say, quite lengthy. They go into detail about how we carry out our work. You do receive these either annually or every other year. There isn't much change in there from previous versions, to be honest. We are just updating them in terms of what we're doing as a function to ensure that our skills and knowledge remain up to date from a resource perspective. We've highlighted new members to the consortium within the charter, but otherwise it's a pretty standard document. So I'm happy to take questions on those, but I think the more interesting part of this paper for you is actually what we want to look at for next year. So this is a plan of work, internal audit programme for 23-24. And we've gone about producing this paper by speaking with all senior management about their risks, and we've done some horizon scanning ourselves to determine where you may be requesting assurances. There's a new section to the report this year that you haven't seen before. We had an external quality assessment undertaken by the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, and I'm very pleased to report that we came out very well in terms of conformance with the standards. But they did highlight that the plans could benefit from an understanding of where other assurances were available so that we didn't duplicate our efforts. So this year we've gone into a little bit more detail about that, and I've outlined the 3 lines of defence on page 41 of your pack, and that just gives a background to how we score and how we think about what assurances are available, and the independence of those assurances determines how much reliance I'm able to place on those instead of doing my own work. So from page, the strategy, so the strategic plan on 54 onwards, this is a high level 3-year programme looking at the types of audits that we should be carrying out over the next 3 years. And I've mapped the strategic risks to those. And where we are or are not looking at areas, I've provided a justification and a rationale in the right-hand column. Just taking you to the start of page 58, you can see there the areas that we want to look at, we're proposing to look at for the year ahead, the number of days that we propose to carry out the work in, and notes in terms of what we might look at. So it's those pages that I think would be most useful to gather your feedback on, and if you thought there were any areas that you expected to see in next year's programme that aren't included. Happy to take your queries and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faye. Councillor Clark, start with you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report, Faye. First, I've read through all the appendices, which are all very, very helpful and comprehensive. Firstly, going through the internal audit plans report for 23-24, the large document. For myself, I agree with Appendix 5 with the top strategic risks there. I note that the bottom one is nutrient neutrality, and obviously that in a sense is a movable feast that may be sold. I would be interested in Appendix 3 on the left-hand side of the column. In the commentary there about where areas have been reviewed and assurance, and it talks about last reviewed or assurance, it would be helpful, not so much me, possibly other members and members not here, how you move between what they call reasonable assurance and substantial. Sometimes I'm pleased it's a reasonable feast, and obviously we would like to see everything in substantial rather than reasonable, and it's obviously, like as with any risk register, that will move, but that's the only question I've got. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, so my response to that question is that we have 4 gradings that we're able to give at each overall review. No assurance, which is clearly an area of concern. Limited, where there is quite a few issues identified as part of the control framework. Reasonable, there is a reasonable assurance that the majority of controls are operating effectively within that system. And there will be a few areas for improvement. So that's kind of a middle of the road, if you like. Still some things to work on, but actually in good health. And then substantial is the top grading that we give. And it tells you that actually everything is operating very effectively. It's well designed, and there are only small, perhaps administration points to bring out for improvement. So those are the 4, and we stick to those in terms of grading each area.
Thank you. Councillor Kybert.
Thank you, Chairman. Under the People and Governance Elections and Electoral Registration, we do have voter identification as a key change to what happens in the election booth this year. Will you be specifically looking at the guidance received from government on that and the ease or difficulty with which it has been able to be enacted?
So this is specifically the requirement for producing identification, is it?
Well, I would see that as a sort of a step change in how elections are run.
No, I just wanted to check that that's the point. Yeah.
Questioning the detail of what that audit will cover.
Faye.
I think the intention for this piece of work is, if we tried to complete it now and looked at preparations for that new requirement, then we would be very much getting in the way of staff that are preparing for the elections. And I think it would be quite difficult to request lots of information from them at this stage. So my design of this review was to look back and actually say, was there an implementation plan? How well did that go? Are there any lessons that can be learned from that for future elections? So yes, that's a new element, and we absolutely want to provide some assurance around that and how it's gone and whether it's gone well.
Thank you. Members, any further comments or questions? Yes, Councillor Monument.
I do have 1 or 2 queries on these schedules. One thing that puzzles me, and it may just be a matter of wording, is that we are told that this particular item offers us the internal audit charter for 2023 to 24, and then the strategic internal audit plan 2023-24 to 2026-27. And it keeps telling us that's 3 years. Could somebody please explain to me how you make that 3 years? I think what it really is trying to say is that we've got a plan for 23-24, and that we've got a plan for the ensuing 3 years after that. But the use of forthcoming 3 years and forthcoming financial year, page 40, paragraph 4.2, I looked at this several times over and couldn't make any sense of it, frankly. Is it meant to be a 3-year strategic plan, and the beginning year, which is clearly marked in the schedule? I mean, if you go to page 54, you immediately get 4 columns, 4 years, quite obviously. Is the first one just for comparison? Apart from that confusion, there was something I wanted to query. Page 59. There are several things there which require regular review. And I wondered, perhaps you could tell us, that's fundamental financial systems, the top of the page. Does that mean regular, less than annually, equals annually, or more than annually? And also on the bottom of that same page, there's reference to a planned contract benchmarking exercise. And it says our audit will take place after the planned contract benchmarking exercise. Can somebody tell me when the exercise is planned for so that we can then pin down when the audit happens? I think those are the main ones. Oh, and one last one, page 61, follow-up of audit recommendations. Probably ought to know the answer, but there's a bit there that says all previous audits BRK. What's BRK, please?
Faye.
Thank you. There's a few clarification points to go through there, and I'm very grateful for Councillor pointing those out to me. Just want to be clear in terms of the 3-year programme. I think that could have been said a little bit better, and my apologies for that. We have an annual programme of work, and then we thought about what we might like to cover over a 3-year period after that. So I'll have a look at the wording of my report for next year to make that a bit clearer. Yes, thank you. So the next query, I might need a little bit of help. Sorry, I was getting into responding to each of them, and now I've forgotten what the second one was. But in terms of follow-up and BRK, that is what I have a shortened version for each of our clients, and that's what Breckland Council is called. So I will ensure that's amended to be written in full. Thank you. Yes, the other two have slipped my mind. My
Do you want to just come back on that your questions, Councillor Monument? Is anything outstanding?
Yes, the financial system. So we have key controls work which is carried out annually, and then for each of the key control systems, so this would include accountancy services, payroll, and then we've got things like accounts receivable, accounts payable. They're done every other year. So again, I will ensure that that is clearer in the programme going forward. And then leisure, in terms of when the benchmarking exercise is due to be undertaken, I have that in my notes. They're not in front of me, but I know that we did discuss that with management and profile that for after that exercise. So I can't give you a date. I'm perhaps looking to officers if they know when that is. In the summer, I'm told.
Fabulous. Okay. Any other further comments from members? No, right. We have a recommendations. I just pull up the right page. They are on page 36 of your agendas. Right, here we go. So the committee notes and approves A, the internal audit charter for 2023-24, B, the internal audit strategy for 23-24, C, the strategic internal audit plan 23-24 to 2026-27, and the annual internal audit plan 23-24. Are members happy to approve those? Lovely. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Okay, so we move now to item 10, the Treasury Management Mid-Year Report 22-23. This is on page 63 of your agendas, and we have the Cabinet Member Phil Cowan here. Phil, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. I must confess, I feel like filling in an accountancy sandwich sitting here. And trust me, as an accountant, I'm not. I've got equal sides here, so that's fine. I'm not proposing to speak terribly lengthily about this particular report and the subsequent one you're going to see. It's actually all in the words on the first page of the report. So this is a half-year report. It's Matthew's authorship on this, that's the word. And there are two recommendations that you're required to note in this report. But I think the most important thing is to understand firstly why we're here. And that's identified in item 1, the background. And it merely sets out what we have as a council to do in terms of preparing and producing information for you as members to review. There's an awful lot of technical stuff that follows that. But most importantly, if we look at Appendix A, it sets out there the summary of what's in the report in item 1.1. And again, there's an awful lot of accountancy speak, which is going to be of great interest to some members, I know. And I've got the two experts sitting to my left and my right who will be able to answer all your detailed questions. At that point, Chairman, I'm going to shut up and hand over to probably my left hand.
Right. Morning.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to make a couple of points on the report. As at the end of December, the council had just over £34 million invested in cash with various counterparties, and we have made in those 9 months £340,000 worth of interest coming in from those investments, which was considerably better than the budgeted amount, and that was for two reasons. Firstly, interest rates have been going up consistently for the past 10 months. Probably will go up again today, and we also had higher cash balances for investment, particularly because we received the £8 million for the council tax rebate, energy rebate scheme. We received that in the previous financial year, and then we had about 6 months to then pay that out. So the interest has is a yield is running at 1.865%, which is better than the benchmark figure that we use for comparison. On page 70 of the report, I should just point out that Councillor Monument, thank you, had spotted an error in the table at the top of that report. If you look at the middle column there, the closing balance there should be 2182, and that's the capital financing requirement, which then means the table below that. Again, the middle column, the budgeted capital financing requirement was 2.182 million. In fact, as you can see from the column to the right, by the end of December, the capital finance requirement was quite a bit lower, but we do expect a fair amount of expenditure in the final quarter of the year, which we are projecting will mean that the capital financing requirement by the end of the year will actually be higher than originally budgeted, because there's been additional capital expenditure that wasn't in the original budget by council, such as the expenditure on temporary accommodation. So I'm happy to have any questions on the report.
Thank you very much for that. Members, any questions? Councillor Burt, let's start with you.
Got it. Thank you, Chairman. I've got two. One is just confusion. Perhaps you can help me understand what's happening. In 2.1 on of the report, and on page 68, there's two tables which seem to be very much related to each other, and I'm struggling to understand exactly what's happening. But going on to page 68, the service investments side of things. My initial reading suggests that actually we've only made service investments of half of what we were planning to, or less than half. Now, if that's the case, which investments were not made and why? And is that being carried forward, or have I just misunderstood what the tables are actually telling me?
So the service investments is the capital programme, which that figure will be based on what was reported to, or will be reported to Cabinet on Monday, Q3. So that was the position as at the end of December. clearly there's the final quarter where there'll be further expenditure, and then there will be some requests for carry forward in the capital programme at the end of the year. So not all the budget will have been spent by the end of the year. So I think your understanding.
I think they
was
call it
correct.
slippage. Is that
Yeah,
the term it's used? So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to be delivered. They just won't be delivered within this financial year. And for the answer to the rest of your question, I have to wait for the cabinet report on Monday.
That's fine. No, I can see where that's coming from. It's just that we've got a long way to go. So I just wanted to understand which bits were likely to slip.
Yeah, and as I say, that's for cabinet.
Okay. One more, then on page 79, there's a comment there which says that 49% of our investments have a maturity of less than a week. Why? Would we not be better off actually sort of tying our investments up for months and getting a better return on them? That's sort of the normal way, but perhaps things are different in the council.
It was just a coincidence really that we did have some long-term investments, but they were due back in the first week of January. So the 31st of December, those investments had a maturity of less than a week.
And obviously, who knows what's going to happen to interest rates later on today. So you might want to not tie everything in long term at a set level, where we're looking at the very positive position of being able to invest money. Members, any further questions? So far, I've only had Councillor Burt indicate. If not, then we have some recommendations on page 63 of your agendas. As I say, I'll just bring up page 63. Okay, so the two recommendations are to note the actual prudential indicators for April to December 22-23 within this report, and to note the Treasury Management mid-year report for 22-23 at Appendix A and Appendix B. Are members happy to do that? Yeah, anybody against? Okay, that's all agreed. Thank you very much. Now, we do have on item 11, the policy and strategy, an appendix which is below the line. So we have an option. If members wish to discuss the below the line appendix, I will defer this item to the end of the meeting and we will then take the below the line issues. If members who've obviously all had a chance to read the below the line appendix do not have any further questions regarding to that below the line appendix, then I propose to take that now. So if I could just have some feedback from the members of the committee. Councillor Bird.
I've got questions which are not on the below the line item.
Fine.
So
have you got any on? So no questions on the below the line item. Right. In that case, I propose that we take item 11 now, because we can stay in public session. So if you could turn to page 81 of your agendas, please, for the Treasury Management Policy and Strategy 23-24. And Councillor Cowan, we're back with you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Once again, we will be sitting here as a triumvirate, but I'll be doing very little of the talking in detail. This is a report for you to recommend to Council, and it outlines the Council's prudential indicators for 23-24 and 25-26, as you can read on the agenda there. Again, item 1, the background identifies why we're doing this, why we have to do it, and the procedures subsequently through the report identify how we've gone about it. I have very little more to say, except please note there are key elements of the Prudential Code with which we have to address and work to. And most importantly, item 1.3, it really confirms what we all know, and that is that we have to produce a balanced budget. We're not allowed to produce a budget which isn't balanced. And Councillor Burt has recognised this in some of the conversations we've had elsewhere around budget preparation and such like. So without any further ado, I'm not sure whether it's going to be left or right hand this time, Chairman. So it's going to be left again, all left. Oh, very good. Over to you, Matthew.
This report contains relatively few changes this time because we did bring an updated policy and strategy in July last year, so it's a bit more, the document's a bit more recent than it normally would be. The main change relates to the fact that in July, members agreed to increase the limit for the most secure counterparties to 7.5 million for investments. And we're proposing to amend this because currently the maximum limit we have with non-UK countries, some of which have better sovereign ratings than the UK, is 5 million. So that's and that kind of has trumped the 7.5 million limit. So we're asking for that to be amended so that if we have a very secure counterparty, but it happens to be a non-UK counterparty, that we can invest up to 7.5 million in that counterparty. That's the first. That's the main change. You'll see from the report that we're still not expecting to borrow externally over this time period, but we will need to borrow internally to finance our capital program, which basically means we'll be using our cash investments to fund the capital program, and that will then be repaid over time. We expect, as you'll see from the table on page 94, that our returns on investments for next year will be just over 6% of our revenue stream, because of the level of interest rates and the fact that we do have quite high cash balances still. I would point members' attention to page 99, which shows the liability benchmark, which, as I mentioned in the last time when we brought this strategy to SIPFA, has introduced and is very keen that councils use as a way of outlining its debt and investment profile over the medium term. So this covers the whole 10 years of the capital programme, and you will see the key line to look at is the dotted red line. That is a liability benchmark, and it is negative for the next 10 years. And the reason for that being that we expect our investments to exceed our external borrowing in all of those 10 years. So, happy to take any questions that members have.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, over to you. Mr. Fowler.
Thanks, Chair. Table 2, page 90. Can you just explain, I'm sure it's in the text somewhere, why there's such a, in the line capital receipts and reserves, why there's such a leap from 900,000 in this current financial year to £6 million next year?
We do have a major asset sale, which we expect to happen in 23-24, and that will produce a substantial capital receipt.
And I think the key here is that it is an estimate. So, as I say, that would be drive that, but to say it's an estimate. Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chair. Can I take you to page 131, please, and the interest rate forecast? There have been some truly massive changes in this forecast from previous reports. I mean, back in, when we were meeting back on 23rd of June, the long-standing, or the peak rate then was 2%. Now we're looking at 4.5%. Now I asked the question then, what is the confidence level in the link group forecast, and will we make budgetary plans for inflation and interest rates to be higher? And I'd like to repeat that question today, please, because the budgetary consequences of higher inflation mean that it makes the services we deliver more expensive. And that we've already, and it's also worth noting that we've already set our inflation rate rise in our budget to 3%, and yet this is giving you an indication that that's going to be considerably larger than that And that is going to have an effect on the services that we can deliver. Could you comment on that, please?
Interest rates, they have increased probably faster over the last 12 months than people expected them to do. And so I think you're right that the forecasts have gone up considerably over time. We do produce a comparison from Capital One Economics as well. Can't find a page, but it's on the it's in the report. So that's a comparison interest rates. In terms of inflation, I mean that's really a matter for when we set the budget, and we do take estimates of inflation and the forecast on inflation that the Treasury produces, and we have factored those into the budget setting process for the coming financial year.
I would say, obviously, if one knew exactly what was happening, one would be unique. So we take advice from external parties like Link, who are experts in that, and we get to see how successful they were in guessing what's going to happen when things happen. Councillor Karen, you wanted to come.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. The key word is forecast, really. And that's exactly what budgeting is all about. Budgeting is assessing all the information one has at one's fingertips at any moment in time and deriving a probability of where we're going to end up. And that's no different if you're a householder or if you're a local government, as we are. And it isn't an exact and precise science. So we have to draw on the information that's made available to us from those who are expert in their field. And as you've heard, Treasury is one of those experts, and we have to listen to them, because if we didn't, we'd probably be a bit negligent. So budgeting is a forecast. What we're looking at today here isn't a budget. We're looking at the way we have put the budget together and what information and background information that we've used. And Chairman, I would venture to suggest that there's another place where we will be discussing budgets, in which case some of these detailed questions, which might be on people's lips, may well be better placed to be attended to. Thank you.
Lovely. Any other members, any questions or comments? Councillor Monument.
Just a few small ones. Page 83, Mid-Year Treasury Management Report is the third paragraph. And the third line of that says whether the Treasury strategy is meeting the strategy or whether any policies require revision. I think one of those two strategies probably should be something else, or there should be some enlightenment, because Treasury strategy meeting the strategy sounds a bit too easy to be true. So perhaps somebody could explain to me what that's actually talking about.
So you want to know what the second strategy is?
Or whether the first one was wrong.
Right, okay.
Apart from that, the only queries I've noted are at the bottom of page 105, something that I've seen before and I've made a note to ask. When it comes to investment criteria and things, the very last box refers to local authorities in the chart. And it says approval will be made based on individual circumstances without further reference to the Governance and Audit Committee. Well, my ears twitched when I got to that, and I felt, why don't they ask us? There's probably a good reason, but I've never heard it explained. And in the same way,
should we just take those two?
That's two, there is only
and then
one more.
We'll come back for your
Yeah,
last
okay.
one. Because they're quite detailed.
So
On the first one, I think probably Treasury performance would be a better phrase than the first sentence compared to the strategy. On the second one, I think the spirit of this of that is that we wouldn't be referring back, as we don't refer back to this committee every time we invest in a bank or in a building society. That we wouldn't similarly we wouldn't come back to this committee every time we invested in a particular local authority. I think that would be the spirit.
So what we're saying, as long as it's in accordance with the strategy that's been agreed by this committee, it's not necessary to come back to this committee for further approvals.
Yeah.
Fine. Councillor Monument, you had another point.
Just one odd one at the bottom of page 107. Accounting treatment of investments, and the second sentence says to ensure that the council is protected from any adverse revenue impact which may arise from these differences. We will review the accounting implications of new transactions before they're undertaken. Who are we in this context? Is it us, or is it our good
Oh, I
staff?
see, we. So is it
Or
the
is it the whole
committee or is it the officers?
I think it will be officers in this situation.
Members, any further comments or questions on this item? So if I may take you then to the recommendations on page 81 of your agendas, that this committee recommend to full council that the Treasury Management Strategy 23-24 to 25-26 at Appendix A is approved, that the minimum revenue position MRP statement contained within Appendix A, which sets out the council's policy on the MRP, is approved, that the prudential and local indicators and limits contained within Appendix A, tables 1 to 11 are approved, that the investment strategy 23-24, Appendix B, and the detailed criteria included in Appendix B1 is approved, and that the Treasury Management Policy at Appendix B2 is approved. Are members happy to approve those? You are, great, thank you. Anybody against? No, that is agreed. Thank you. Okay, so we move on to the next item, which is item 12, the external audit plan for, I think that must be 22-23, not 21-22, which is on my agenda. Is 21-22 on page 145. Mark, over to you, sir. So we have, sorry, Mark Hodgson, our external auditor. You're very welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. I think the agenda item is our audit progress report in reference to the 21-22 financial year.
As we was corrected by Julie there.
Have already
thank you for that.
Presented our audit plan to this committee previously. So overall, we're in a really good place with the audit. We're looking to complete and sign the audit opinion next week, and that is due to the good support from Alison, Matthew, and the finance team, and indeed the strength of the draft financial statements presented for audit. As of today, we have few audit differences identified, which does reflect the strength of those closed down procedures. But appreciate that timing is everything, and at the time the papers for this committee went out, we weren't in a position to issue a full audit results report. So you do have an audit progress report before you, and Andrew will take you through an update to that, because procedures have gone on since that date to today and are clearly going to continue through the weekend to enable us to conclude and issue our report next week. So with that basis, we can take you through where we are as of today, and then take any questions and how we hope to get to the end next week.
Great.
Good morning, members. So as Mark said, I will give you an update against the major areas noted in the progress report, as well as an overall update on the outstanding items. So starting with the management override risk, we are currently undertaking our journal entry testing. As it currently stands, we have noted no issues. We are nearing our completion of work over estimates with no identification of any concerns around assumptions or management bias there. With respect to risk of inappropriate capitalization of revenue expenditure, we have finished our testing for revenue expenditure funded by capital under statute with no findings. We've completed our testing for investment property additions, again with no findings. And our PPE additions testing is ongoing, with some queries going back and forth with management that we hope to resolve by the end of this week. On valuations of buildings and investment property, we have completed our first run through of the evidence provided by management and the valuers. There was queries back to the finance team that are pending. So those are that's a major area where we are still working through to reach our conclusions. On pensions, We've completed our assessment of Hyman Robertson as the management specialist. We've obtained from our UI pensions team now their calculation of the liability with no issues noted, and we're expecting to receive the pension fund letter today. From a draft version of that, there is no findings that would impact the audit any further beyond the initial rerun of the Hyman's report that happened in September as a result of additional information being provided to the actuary from the fund managers. For the NDR appeals, we completed our first round of review of it, where we did identify additional areas from our side where we needed a greater understanding of the inputs to the estimate. That has been provided back to us and is now in its second round of review. On recoverability of debtors, again, we completed our first level review. There were no comments back to management, it's more cleanup on our end, so no significant concerns for the provisions there. On change in management structure, we've completed our review of the current year EFA. However, we're still working through the documentation due to the restatement of the prior year EFA and expenditure and income notes due to the change in directorate from the change in management structure driven by the separation of Brooklyn and South Holland. On infrastructure assets, we have concluded that the gross book value is not material to the entity, which then drives our further considerations. We've obtained an understanding of the depreciation policies and also noted that records at Brooklyn are sufficient, that there is no need to implement the statutory instrument or the code adoption. So it keeps it simpler for everyone. We are working through one area on that just related to depreciation and the application of that policy, which we are going through with management today. On group accounts, as noted in the progress report, we did, after the audit plan, deemed that this area was not an area of higher risk. The work is ongoing to go through the consolidation, but again, no issues to report at this point. That brings us to the end of the noted areas of risk. In terms of our findings to date, we have one on the pension fund in the amount of 657,000. This was identified by management through a rerun Hyman's report and is just reflective of the timing difference for information received. And then we do have a 1.6 million pound difference in grant income related to a COVID grant that was initially treated as principal, whereas it should have been treated as agency. So the adjustment will have that amount coming out of both the income and expenditure on the comprehensive income statement. And then there is an outstanding amount related to that of about 500,000 that will be carried on creditors. And then there are a number of other small disclosure areas that I believe have been noted by Matthew in his report. And then just in terms of the outstanding list towards the bottom of the report in Appendix A, we have seen significant movement in accounts receivable, accounts payable, other income, other expenditure. Detail testing in most of these areas is largely complete and in review. We're progressing payroll, cash investments, and our work over cash flow disclosures currently as we speak in the audit room upstairs. That brings me to the end of my update for where the audit is at. I don't know if there are any questions or concerns.
Thank you very much for that. And it sounds very positive. And it also sounds like you've still got a bit to do this weekend. So I wish you luck with that. Members of the committee, any comments or questions so far? So Councillor Kybird.
More from a point of interest. Are all matters concerning the previous partnership with South Holland now clearly defined and closed?
The partnership is not fully expunged. There is still shared services between South Holland and Brecklin. So we are completing work over that continued relationship. It's significantly less this year in terms of the shared services, and we are still working through the related party disclosures and the EFA disclosures, which would attach to that.
Thank you. Mr. Fowler.
Thank you. There are a few references to, as you mentioned, outstanding information that you require. So on page 149 around the risks, you're awaiting supporting documentation, and then in appendix right at the end of the report there's a long list of items on page 154 and 155 where you're still waiting for information. So really just are you confident that you'll receive that information in a timely manner? And I guess for Brecklin, are there any issues that you think the committee ought to be concerned around in terms of providing that information to the auditors?
So we have had an ongoing dialogue with management and have been receiving information since this report was issued. There is new queries that come and go, but we aren't concerned with our ability to obtain information.
Alison Chabot, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I just wanted to sort of add to that. This was a list at a point in time. And as Andrew says, things go backwards and forwards. So it was just what was outstanding at that time. It could have said something different a week earlier or a week later. So yeah, we try our hardest to get things back quickly, as do EY. So we've got good dialogue.
But it's good to hear that the key point is the information that's required coming in a timely manner. And I think that's positive to hear. Do you have any other comments, Mr. Fowler? Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Burt next.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I make just a comment, please, about page numbering? Because I've got the public agenda pack here, and I'm looking on page 217 of as listed in the the picture on my screen, but it's coming up as page 210 in the pack. So I think that could be confusing to anybody that's trying to follow along from an alternate agenda pack. So on page 217, my eye just had fallen upon this one, the outstanding legal cases, 101,000.
We're not on page, so we're on this item on the agenda is not on page 200 anything.
No, that's the next item. That's the audited statement of accounts. We haven't got there yet. We're still on the report from the auditors.
I apologise, Chairman. I have got ahead of myself.
That's right. Your keenness is noted, Councillor Bird. Right. Any further questions on the report? Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chairman. You referred to 1.6 million down to COVID. How will that actually affect our balances? Can you explain to an accounting ignoramus?
This is a grant that should have been carried on the balance sheet because it had specific terms that said that the council didn't necessarily have control over how that money was spent. So it wouldn't go through your income statement at all. So you wouldn't see the expenditure, you wouldn't see the revenue. So there is no impact to the bottom line at the end of it because it comes out equally from both sides. You would just see it on the balance sheet for the amount that's remaining outstanding at year end, which is about 500,000.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Morgan? The short of it. Right, if there's no more further comments, thank you. Oh, Councillor Morgan, sorry.
Could I just ask one other point about the pension liability? Do you see that as stable, or what risk are we exposed to if stock markets are moving?
From my perspective, the pension liability on your balance sheet and every council's balance sheet varies up and down every year by quite a significant amount. And the number on your balance sheet is your liability if you had to pay out every pension tomorrow. So it's never really going to realise as a number like that at any point in time. The pension fund at Norfolk County Council, on behalf of all the local authorities within it, is a very stable pension fund. It is, I think, 100% funded currently and has a very stable policy behind its investment strategy. And these are actuarial gains and losses because interest rates, market rates, gilt rates go up and down on an hourly, if not daily, if not weekly basis. So your number is a number at a point in time, but is never likely to be a council liability that you have to pay out tomorrow, the next day. It's going to be diminishing over time as the age of the pensioners goes down as well.
I mean, all I would say is in previous years, we've had some pretty big shocks in that the report nationally has said, and we've sat tight and well, we have no choice because these are external and the pension fund is the pension fund. And at the moment, I think it was last year, we had some very positive news and the liabilities disappeared, even though we hadn't done anything. So, you know, we are in the hands of others on that. But at the moment, it's as positive as I've ever seen it. You know, but it's much more positive than perhaps we've seen in previous years. Any further questions for the auditors on their update report? No, thank you very much for that. So I'm going to move us on to the next item, which Councillor Burt's been looking at for some time, which is the audited statement of accounts for 21-22. And if I could turn to Alison Chabot. Alison. Oh, Matthew, sorry.
Thanks, John. So this report just summarises the position following on from the auditor's update to you. So the audit has progressed well. You'll see in paragraph 1.3 a list of the changes that you were making to the accounts compared to the version that you saw last July. Andrew has mentioned there will be an additional change around the COVID-related grant and also around depreciation of our infrastructure. I think the important point to note is that most of those changes are only to notes to the accounts. There are a couple like the COVID grant that will affect the main financial statements, the balance sheet and the income and expenditure statement, but the changes won't affect the outturn position on the capital or revenue that's previously been reported to members. The report does recommend delegation because of the timing issues and the fact that there won't be an audit opinion. There isn't one at this point in time. So it does recommend delegation to the chair in order to get the financial statement signed off, the annual governance statement signed off, and the letter of representation signed as well. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Members of the committee, over to you. Councillor Burt, you would like to go back to your original question?
Yes, well, I'm still confused by page numbers, so it's either 210 or 217, I think. In the pack.
If you give us the paragraph number, we'll work from there.
Well, it's note 15 provisions, and it was just one that my eye had fallen upon because the text behind that, I'm looking at the outstanding legal cases budget or the provision that we put in there. And the text is all about planning cases. I'd just like to verify, is that the provision is entirely for planning cases, or do we have provision for other legal cases which comes under in this space as well?
They all relate to planning court cases at this point in time.
Councillor Hambidge.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd just like to point out to Councillor Burt, there are currently 3 people watching YouTube, of which I am one. So there are 2 people in the Breckland area watching. So
who knew we were so popular here?
Exactly.
Anyway, so is your question being responded to? Any? Yes, Mr. Fowler, over to you, sir.
Sorry to
Not at all.
always talk about planning things. On page 163, I'm just wondering how the authority managed to determine more applications than were received in that top right-hand bubble.
That would be to do with timing of different
Well,
years.
so there's 701 carried forward from the last 713 from the last year. Anyway, seems a lot.
I can check the numbers, but you're absolutely right. There is a timing difference, but I will check the typos just in case.
Any further questions or queries on the draft accounts? No? Okay, right. So as I said, these are not the final accounts. So we have in our recommendations to agree a delegation. So I'm going to take us through the recommendations. And they are recommendations that, subject to the finalisation of the audit of the accounts by Ernst & Young, the Governance Audit Committee resolves as follows. A, to approve the financial statements of the council as presented, having taken account of the external auditor's report, to authorise the chairman of the Governance and Audit Committee to sign and date the financial statements once the auditor has completed their outstanding procedures as described, on the basis that no material audit differences are identified. If those procedures identify any material audit difference which would require a material adjustment to the financial statements, the Governance Audit Committee would be notified and updated accordingly, and a new motion to approve the revised financial statements made at the next available Governance and Audit Committee meeting. B, to approve the annual governance statement 21-22 as presented, having taken account of the external auditor's report, to authorise the Chief Executive and Leader to sign and date the annual governance statement once the auditor has completed their outstanding procedures as described, on the basis that no material audit differences have been identified or are expected. And C, to authorise the Chairman of the Governance and Audit Committee to approve the letter of representation for 21-22 once this is received. So I'm going to propose that. Do I have a seconder from a member of the committee? Councillor Monument. Would all in favour please show? Anyone against? That is unanimous. Thank you. So that now takes us to item 14, which is accounting policies, and which I have on my agenda as page 263. So are we back with Matthew again? Matthew, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. There are just a couple of changes proposed to the accounting policies for this financial year. You'll see it's on page 270 of the report, a change in the way we calculate the appeals provision for the 2017 appeals list. We were including an additional appeals allowance of 3% of net rates for 2017 because it can take a long time for appeals to come through, but it has now been 6 years since 2017, and therefore we think we no longer need to do that. That was the first change, and then the second change proposed is on page 276, which relates to surplus land. We just want to align the de minimis level for that to £20,000, so that we're not including some very small parcels of land such as grass purges in our fixed assets register. Those are the only two changes proposed.
Thank you very much. I make the recommendations at the start of the report on page 260, which was different from the number I gave you before, which I apologise for. I've now got Councillor Monument. Councillor Monument.
Just one comment on that last bit, 276. If we're removing bits of wording, I think we may have removed slightly too much. If I take the whole paragraph where that last bit of yellow was, it says a de minimis level of 20,000 has been adopted for the inclusion of non-current assets in all categories. I think with the exception of, should stay in, and you skip all the rest of the yellow and it continues, vehicles and equipment, which have a de minimis level of 10,000 and grant funding received, which has none. Otherwise, the bit about vehicles and equipment doesn't join on to the rest of the sentence because you've taken out with the exception of.
Well, I think that's an excellent point. Would you be happy to agree that that, with the exception of, remains in? Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Councillor Monument. As usual, your forensic detail is much valued by this committee. I've got Councillor Burt.
Very quick query, please, Chairman. Who determines the de minimis level?
Would that be Cabinet or would that be this committee?
That would be this committee in terms of approving these accounting policies.
Right, so it is us. So it's a member decision. Any further questions or comments on the policies? Okay, I haven't had anybody. So the recommendations that the Governance Audit Committee review and agree the accounting policies for 22-23 at Appendix A. I propose that. Could I have a seconder?
With that amendment.
Sorry, with the amendment as mentioned by Councillor Monument, and Councillor Monument has agreed to second the motion as well. So all in favour, please show. Anybody against? That's agreed. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of the accounting policy. So I'd like to release Ernst & Young. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I know you've got lots to do, so I won't keep you here any further. And the Cabinet Member for Finance and the team, if you are excused, if you would like to go, I don't want to keep you here. We are moving on to item 15, standards, the review of the Code of Conduct. So anybody who is not involved in that is released if they, unless they want to stay, of course, when of course they're very welcome. Yeah, that's lovely. So item 15, standards review code of conduct, which I've got down on my agenda as 280, but it might be different. It is 280, right? Let's get to that. And we are joined by Sarah Woolston-Holmes-Smythe, who's our legal services manager. And Rory Ringer from Democratic Services. So you're both very welcome. And over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As you are no doubt aware, under the Localism Act.
Have you got your microphone on?
I have, but close enough, sorry.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Sorry, I'll start again. So as you are no doubt aware, under the Localism Act, which is the current legislative arrangements for members' code of conduct, we, the council, are required to adopt a code of conduct. The council's current arrangements were adopted by full council in March 2017, and the current code is published as part 5 of the Constitution. Following a review of the ethical framework for members, the Committee on Standards in Public Life recommended that there should be a national code of conduct. They set the LGA on the task of producing one, which they have duly done, and that code was finalised and published and released in May 2021. You will see from the comparison table at paragraph 3.1 of the report that the LGA model code of conduct is more detailed and more self-explanatory than the current one that we have. I can answer any questions on that in a minute if you like. It should be noted that there is no compulsion to adopt the new model code of conduct, and obviously we can retain our existing one. However, our recommendation is that we should adopt the new model code of conduct, namely because it is well set out and reasonably straightforward to follow. It benefits from being the product of an up-to-date comprehensive review of the area. It will give this council a more up-to-date code of conduct in language that is hopefully easier to follow than the current version. And it is helpful to have the support of the LGA in this area generally, and if adopted, the council would benefit from having aligned our code of conduct to others in the area. As the LGA produces further guidance or recommended changes, we will be better placed to consider these and take these on locally. It would also, as I've mentioned, also mean a consistency of approach across the Norfolk councils. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think this is very important because not only is it for Breckland, but it is used by a lot of the Breckland Model Constitution, and specifically the Code of Conduct is used as the basis by a lot of parish councils, who obviously we are the ultimate standards body for as well. There was some discussion about the timing that this coming just before an election and binding the new council. But I did feel that it was worth bringing it now so that all new councillors, or all councillors who are elected, because we will all be new because we'll all be re-elected or not, depending on how we get on, will be bound by the same constitution, and it'll give the other councils in the Breckland area the opportunity then to build on the updated Breckland. I also think that it's timely for us to recommend to full council this now, because for the reasons that the officer outlined, in that we do now have a new agreed recommended LGA model, which is what this is based on. So just for good governance, it's important to stay updated and, as I say, aligned with the other councils. So members, any questions or comments? Councillor Kybird and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. So we're proposing to adopt the Code of Conduct as referred to in Appendix B, which isn't what it says in the recommendation. And that starts with a joint statement. Who are the parties to the joint statement? Because that's not clear to me.
That's a good point. It doesn't actually specify, but I'm assuming it was all of those involved in the discussions, which will be your membership, won't it, the electoral commission membership, ADSO.
Yeah.
Obviously the LGA. I mean, we can find out. Yeah, it's no, I accept that it's not obvious. But obviously I can find out more detail on that and report back if you like.
Absolutely.
The other thing, the model code doesn't refer to, in terms of objectivity, it doesn't make any mention of predeterminism. For instance, when you're on a planning committee, predetermination, and I think that in itself is a bit of an omission, particularly new members reading this will be told that planning committee they shouldn't be predetermined, but there's nothing in the Code of Conduct that explains what it should be. There's very little in terms of reference to data protection, which, having looked at the risk register, I think needs to be defined in that Code of Conduct. And I also think that the Code of Conduct should guide councillors into receiving appropriate training to their role as a councillor.
Okay, are you making any formal proposals, Councillor Kybert? Or are they comments on the paper at this stage?
At this stage, they are comments.
Fine, okay, well,
but
I'll
will-
take
I
the
will
other.
reserve my position.
Okay, that's no problem. We've got Councillor Clark.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's good to see, obviously, the reference again to the standards in public life, the Nolan principles, which are actually brought, I think, under the major government, I think, which stand the test of time. And without getting too political, obviously, it'd be very good if people, organisations outside the local government sphere lived up to the spirit and the actuality of the Nolan principles. Obviously, I'm pleased if local government is taking the lead, perhaps people in the next tier might take note of that. I'm very pleased that under 1.2, it still says you can express, challenge, criticise and disagree views, ideas, opinions and policy in a robust but civil manner. I'm making the assumption, of course, that in any council where there is a large majority one way or the other, whichever complexion, that is up to the monitoring officer, obviously, to decide whether, for example, any complaints might be brought not just by the members of the public, but other councillors or councillors which might be deemed to be vexatious. So that's up to the monitoring officer. I do note that in the past, not any current councillors, but I know my second councillor term, but in one of my terms, I did note that there was one councillor that was subject to disapproval, shall we say, in public full council. And obviously that's one of the things where people, for example, say, well, you can't take part in anything if you haven't paid your council tax and so forth. But the other side of that is the particular sanctions, which it's unclear of. I'm not proposing any sanctions, stocks or terms of imprisonment or anything like that. But obviously welcome any comments that you might have particularly.
The Standards Committee, as in the Government Standards Committee, they obviously have made recommendations to the government in terms of what powers the monitoring officer has, and at the moment they're still waiting for comeback from the government and their comments on this. And obviously once we have those comments, we can then look at the code of conduct, and I'm assuming the LGA will look at the code of conduct and also assess whether it should be amended. When that will be, I don't know, but I'm anticipating, and one of the recommendations to the government was that they do look at, for example, changes to the role and responsibilities of the independent person, updates to the local government transparency code, an appeals process, so that there's sort of more than just the sanctions. There's lots of things that actually could end up being fed into the code, and it could be amended. And obviously we'll take our guidance from the LGA.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful, particularly also in terms of any appeal process, because I know sometimes there can be a ruling and sometimes somebody may have made a complaint. So there's that's decision of the monitoring officer is final and so on and so forth. So there may be some need for additional safeguards coming in later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I've got Councillor Bird and then Councillor Monument.
Thank you, Jim. I too had noticed that slight missing part about predetermination. So thank you, Councillor Kybert. Yes, but taking that to one side, and I think we could probably add something in if we needed to ourselves for clarification. I don't think it's going to come as any surprise to you that I support the adoption of the model code as a very significant improvement on what's in our constitution already. For literally years, I've been pointing out some of the flaws in our interpretation of the Nolan principles. So adopting this at least is going to get us up to date, and we are going to have to be, truthful? I think there's an element which carries on in our constitution. So it says in the Standards for Public Life, it applies, and I quote, to all people appointed to work in the civil service, local government. That includes equally officers of the council. Now, this model code that we're looking at today is specifically for councillors, but it begs the question as to whether we need to review the next part of our constitution, 5B, Protocol Member Officer Relations, and update that along the lines of what is being discussed here in this model code.
Okay, I take your point in that I understand it. I wouldn't necessarily, because obviously officers are employed by the authority and they have a terms of conditions of employment, which very clearly outlines their responsibilities and behaviours as employees of the council. Now, we're elected as members and we're held accountable by the public. And I think that's why the standards regime specifically here is for us as members. So I'm not going to propose or I wouldn't support any further movement on that at this stage. And I'm not aware that it has been an issue or that there's been any unresolved issues in the past that would require us to say this is something that needs to be dealt with. So I'd be tempted to leave it alone. But I do understand your point, Councillor Burt. I've got Councillor Monument.
3 points, I think. Generally, as Councillor Burt's just said, this has been something that's been needing to happen for some time. And I like the wording and what we've got here. One small query on page 282, if anybody's not sure, that's the second half of item 3.1, the listing which shows what the model code got and what Beckman's got, where it says standards of councillor conduct in the middle of what I've got as page 282, we've got some numbers. 2 is bullying, harassment and discrimination. 5 says dispute. I don't think it should say dispute. I think it should probably say disrepute, because in the Breckland column, it says doesn't mention disrepute specifically. Before we pass it on to full council, I'd like little things like that to make sense.
Roy Ringer's nodding, so we will get that spelling amended. Thank you.
There's a spelling I don't like on page 290 too. Appendix B. I agree that it ought also to make clear who's doing all the talking here. Who are we? But the third line of the joint statement suggests all adopt the behaviours, as in the American spelling. I don't know who wrote it, but I don't think it should be written as if it's from an American without telling us who's writing it.
Well, again, Mr. Ringer is nodding.
Good. The other one is a slightly broader point. Appendix A, page 286, Code of Conduct. Just above those wonderful principles, which I heartily support, paragraph 1.2 struck me as ringing entirely the wrong note when it says, all councillors must be committed to behaving in a manner that is consistent with the following principles. Yes, to achieve best value for our residents and maintain public confidence in this authority. Well, I'd say the first thing is that it should maintain public confidence in this authority. Achieving best value for our residents seems a very strange reason why we should stick to those principles to me. And if somebody can explain to me why it's there at all, fine. But if I had my way, I'd put maintain public confidence in this authority way above achieving best value for our residents in those principles.
I'll pick that up because I do agree. I mean, I do think it's important, but I think in terms of integrity and honesty, I think that's what that's referring to as well. But I mean, the key thing, you're right, is maintain public confidence. But it does. But I think the point is maybe if they were the other way round. But I'm not proposing that we alter it, but because they are both there.
Sorry,
I've got Councillor Kyber.
Can I just clarify what page you're on? I missed
So
what
it's
page you said.
paragraph 1.2 under code of conduct. Okay, so hang on. So as Councillor Kybird has correctly pointed out, when you scroll up to the top of that page, it is the current code of conduct. So that's where we are now. So, right. So thank you for that enlightening interjection there, Councillor Kybird. Councillor Burt, you wanted to come in?
I was just going to comment that it was the original code of conduct and also where it came from. I think that because that best determination comes in the 1972 Local Government Act. And I think that's where it's derived from.
And then we've got a bit of history there from Councillor Burt as well, so that's helpful. Okay, we have a recommendation which I would like to move, that we adopt the model code of conduct. Well, we recommend to full council that they adopt the model code of conduct at the next opportunity for full council to meet. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hambidge. All in favour?
Could I propose an amendment that further clarification as to predetermination is included either in the policy or in the constitution?
I'm nervous about taking that. Sarah, over to you.
I believe that is already covered in the planning protocol. So yeah, members are already subject to it in the relevant forum.
So the planning protocols in the constitution.
It's a protocol that basically is adopted by the members of the planning committee, and it's some guides for those sitting on planning committee, and part of that covers predisposition and predetermination.
Okay, well, perhaps we could, not as this recommendation, but we could ask you to bring something back to connect the planning protocol to the constitution. But as a separate piece of work. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. Mr. Fowler.
I mean, the same issue would apply to other quasi-judicial panels like licensing as well, wouldn't it? You may want to broaden it just from planning to decisions at licensing committee also. Same principle.
So I suppose there is, we're taking on Mr. Fowler's point there. There's an ask that you bring something back to this committee for us to consider around that area at a future meeting. Would that cover your point? Thank you, Councillor Kybird. So Councillor Clark.
Just a comment to thank Councillor Kybird for raising that. As a member of the planning committee, obviously I confirm that all members are advised to make any declaration of interest when they come to a particular item, and we normally have our solicitor, Mr. Horn, advising on whether members have a what's it called, a pecuniary interest, but also potentially a personal interest that members withdraw, and that also operates that disclosure at town and parish council, but nonetheless it's probably helpful to have that coming back via Rory, because sometimes some members aren't always quite so sure how to act. Thank you.
So we'll just deal with the business of the recommendation, and then I'll just come back on the final comments. So the original recommendation is proposed, it stands as originally proposed. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. So that's duly passed. Yes, I'm not asking for a big piece of work, maybe just a line in the Constitution that says that the members of the planning committee should take account of the planning protocol present at the time. So I don't think we need to spell it out necessarily, as long as it's agreed somewhere by cabinet or somebody that what the planning protocol is.
This proposal requires changes to the constitution. So will that be a separate?
I think it'd be a separate, because we get regular updates for the constitution, changes for the constitution. So this is a standing item for this committee. So
this current motion won't take effect until it has been enshrined in the constitution.
I'll have to take advice on that. Is Councillor Kybird's?
So your current motion as in predetermination?
No, the
actual model code of conduct. As soon as council approve it, it will become part of the constitution.
So I assume then it will supersede the previous references to the current state standards regime.
So will that recommendation, does it automatically become part of the constitution, or does it require a parallel motion saying this bit of the constitution will change?
Again, back to the officers.
So the recommendation that we put to council will be this report, but it will also say that this is a recommendation from Governance and Audit Committee, and it will become part of the constitution. And our view is that it becomes effective from when the new members come into force, because otherwise, if it becomes effective from when it goes to council, you're going to have a small period, a window where members are going to be bound by the new constitution, where effectively they may only be in office for a few weeks. So our suggestion is going to be that this comes into force following the election when the new members.
Okay, so we've had the vote, we've agreed it, and we've dealt with your questions. All well made. Okay, so I have nothing further on item 15, standards review of the code of conduct. So item 16 is the work programme, and a copy of the committee's work programme can be found in your agenda pack. Any comments from members on the work programme? No, okay, so we now move to item 17, which is the next meeting, which is on the 22nd of June. Now, all I would say to members is none of us, or all of us, or some of us may not be here at the date of the next meeting, because obviously there's an election intervening. So who knows, from the members' point of view, what the future holds for any of us. So I would like to say a big thank you to Julie, who has run this committee for the last 4 years, to the officers for their support and help. And I would like to say thank you very much to the members of the committee, and I'm including David Fowler in that, for your time and wise interjections over the last 4 years for this committee. Because who knows, as I say, what the future may bring. Councillor Kybird.
Just in terms of that 22nd of June meeting, you can just go back and suggest that new member training be specifically addressed. I know it's a standing item,
right,
but it will be a necessary focus of any new committee.
Well, thank you all very much indeed for the last 4 years. Thank you. With that, I close the meeting.